Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Antiphon's speech, or a speech that Antiphon wrote and that probably actually someone else gave, called Against the Stepmother. In ancient Greece, the way that courts worked, the way that trials worked, was very different than what we have in, say, the United States today, or Canada, or the UK, any of these sorts of traditions. In ancient Greece, there were no lawyers. There was fairly straightforward process of prosecuting and defending, in which the person bringing the charge would make a speech to convince the jury being made up of roughly 500 Athenian citizens. To the person making the speech would try and convince the jury to convict this person. The defendant, the person being accused, would make a speech defending themselves against the accusation. The laws were much more sort of flexible in that you didn't have a professional cast of lawyers. You had the laws actually publicly posted, and so both the person bringing the suit and the person defending themselves would refer to only the laws that supported their case and try and convince the jury that this was the relevant law to be paying attention to. And so it's in this context that Antiphon's speech against the stepmother is made. Basically, the case involved a young man who accused his stepmother of poisoning his father. Because at the time that his father died, the young man was not of legal age to bring a law case. He actually had to wait several years, but he brings this law case against his mother, his stepmother, for actually poisoning his father, which he claims that she has done, and against his half-brother for supporting his mother and not defending their father. It's an interesting speech. And actually this idea, even though the person who was prosecuting or defending gave this speech themselves, in ancient Athens, it was extremely common for people with the money to do so, to hire professional speech writers, people who were trained in the art of rhetoric, who had experience writing successful legal arguments in the past, and that's what Antiphon was. He was one of these professional speech writers. Whether that probably wasn't his only job, he probably did other things as well. But because he had a talent for rhetoric and had a talent for legal argumentation, he wrote a lot of these speeches that people could give, and they paid him for it. So the speech itself is really, really interesting for a number of reasons. In part because it uses rhetoric really effectively to build this young man's case. So the opening portion of the speech goes like this. I'm still so young and inexperienced in legal matters, gentlemen, that I face a terrible dilemma in this case. Either I fail in my duty to my father, who instructed me to prosecute his murderers, or if I do prosecute, I'm forced to quarrel with people who should least of all be my opponents, my own half-brothers and these brothers' mother. But fortune and these opponents themselves have forced me to bring this case. It would be more reasonable for them to seek vengeance for the dead man and assist my prosecution, but they did just the opposite. They opposed my suit and are thus murderers themselves, as I and my indictment both state. If I show that their mother murdered our father intentionally and with premeditation, and indeed that she was caught in the act of giving his death not just once, but of contriving his death not just once, but many times before, then I beg you, gentlemen, take vengeance, first for your laws which you received from the gods and your ancestors, for you convict people by these laws just as they did. Second, take vengeance for the dead man, and at the same time help me who am left all alone. You are now my family, while they, who ought to avenge the dead man and help me, have become his murderers and my opponents. Where can one turn for help? Where can one take refuge except with you and with justice? So that's a brilliant opening, rhetorically. So what do we have going on here? Well, this opening bit, I'm still so young and inexperienced in legal matters, I face a terrible dilemma. This should be the ethical choice that I make, but here's the ethical quandary I'm in. What does this do? Well, this starts generating sympathy for the speaker. Oh, I'm young and inexperienced. I need help. Please assist me in my quest for justice. Especially, I need help because I'm torn between my duty to my father and the betrayal of the other members of my family. We've got this statement of the accusation. If I prove that my mother poisoned my father and tried to do so multiple times. So we know exactly what it is that this speaker is going to try and show us. And then we've got this appeal to justice. Now, this was an important value for the Athenians. They were very, very committed to justice and to the rule of law. It was fundamental to Athenian democracy that people have the opportunity to defend themselves in court, people have the opportunity to bring prosecutions in court, and people have the opportunity to speak and convince members of the jury. That was absolutely crucial to Athenian democracy. And so this appeal to justice and the tradition of the laws is an appeal to the audience's values. So not only is this is a patriarchal society in which fathers are incredibly important, and this speaker, Antiphon, has got us that. This speaker is appealing to the value of his relationship with his father. This is also a society in which justice is a key component of social order and of democratic order. And this speaker is appealing to that as well. So the audience is primed to be on this speaker's side because he's appealing to their values. These are things that are important to you, and these are the things that are important to me. We therefore have a connection, and my cause aligns with things that you are important. And then we end with these two rhetorical questions. Where can one turn for help? Where can one take refuge except with you and with justice? Rhetorical questions, as we know, are not questions meant to be answered. They are statements for effect. What the effect here is I am devastated by this. I require assistance, and I ask that you assist because of your values, the things that are important to you. So, as this speech goes on, we get a number of techniques incorporated. One of the things that this speaker does, that Antiphon as a writer of this speech does, is makes comparisons between this event, the alleged poisoning of the speaker's stepmother, and mythological stories that the listeners of this speech would be very aware of, especially the story of Clytemnestra, who murders Agamemnon. We see this, for instance, in the first play of Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy, where Agamemnon returns home from the Trojan War and is murdered by Clytemnestra, his wife. So that pattern of spousal murder by a wife would be something that the audience was very, very familiar with. But a lot of this speech, interestingly enough, really depends on narrative. It depends on the telling of a story. Because we get this moment at a certain point where in the speech it says, "I will now try to give you a true account of what happened, and may justice be my guide." Now that's an interesting statement, because realistically there's no way that this speaker or Antiphon could know much of what they then claim happened. It has to do with like personal conversations between the stepmother and another woman, or with the stepmother's thought process, the other woman's thought process, this kind of stuff, like things that this speaker could not reasonably know. So today, realistically, in a courtroom in, say, the United States, we would probably say, that sounds like speculation rather than legitimate evidence. And that testimony would be dismissed. If you came in and said, here's what must have happened because that's what my case depends on, the judge would say, fuck up off it, out of here. You're not going to go in here and say, convict this person because of what I say must have happened. That simply doesn't meet our evidentiary standards. But one of the things that's really striking here is that last phrase, "and may justice be my guide." Because justice, there was a Greek deity of justice. There was a Greek god of justice, and a number of other gods were associated with justice as well. So in this case, this is not just a statement, I speculate that this happened. This is, the gods are inspiring me. We might think, for instance, at the beginning of epic poems like Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, where we get these references to "Sing, O Muse," or "Muses guide my song," or things like this, whatever it is, whatever formulation it happens to be in a particular poem or epic poem. This idea that the gods are the ones doing the speaking, I'm just the one with the voice. That's implicit here, if not explicit here, depending on how we read it necessarily. And so that idea of my testimony is divinely inspired is actually a really, really good rhetorical technique if you can get away with it. And typically today, in a legal case, you can't get away with it. But in ancient Greece, that was something that you could make the argument for. You could say, my testimony comes from the gods and is therefore true. And Antiphon does that in this speech, I think. This line, "and may justice be my guide," is an evocation of the divine authority of the story that's being told. So again, if we take this speech, which is not super, super long necessarily, Antiphon does a lot of really, really effective rhetorical techniques shaped both around the legal norms of ancient Greek trials and around the value systems of his intended audience.